So this week, I got home Tuesday evening, and my wife said, hey, let's go vote. And so I was ready to get it done, and so yes, we went and voted. And so we went through the process of voting, and I know many of you have probably already done that, and I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, so don't even ask. But I voted, and we got done, and we walked past all the people that were waving signs and saying all the things that they were saying, and I felt so dirty. And I felt dirty not because of how I voted, I felt dirty because of the whole process, right? And again, I've never told you who to vote for, and I never will tell you to vote for. I won't even tell you who I voted for. But the whole process has just been so dirty to me. And so we walked past those people, and we listened to everything that they said, and we got in the car, and then something different happened. This incredible sense of peace came over me. Because I was done. I was done. But it was more than I was done. It was the realization at that moment that regardless of what happens on Tuesday, regardless of what happens when we wake up Wednesday morning, assuming that the decision is made, regardless of what takes place, God is still God. And we drove away from that and it was like, okay, God's got this. And so I just told myself, not my circus, not my monkeys anymore. It's God's circus, right? And so I say all that because I think as we approach Tuesday, there's a lot of fear and animosity and a lot of different emotions that go through us. And we've been talking about God. And very intentionally leading up to this election, we talked about God's greatness and how powerful He is. We talked about His holiness and how He can't even think of a wrong decision, right? And we talked about His immanence and how He is involved in the world and how He's involved in each of our lives to the point of knowing how many hairs we have on our heads. And last week we talked about the Trinity and we talked about how that reality affects us as God lives in us. And then today we're going to finish off this series about who God is by talking about His invitation. What does He invite us to do? Who does He invite us to be in this world? So I want to ask you to turn with me to Matthew chapter 11. We're going to look at some of the words of Jesus, who was God, as we talked about last week, who was God and incarnate, living as God as a human. We're on page 976 if we're using the Pew Bible. Matthew chapter 11, verse 25. We'll read through verse 30. And so Jesus goes throughout His journey saying over and over again, particularly in the book of John, how he declares His Godhead. And so He does a similar thing here. And then He gives us an invitation. So Matthew chapter 11, verse 25. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal Him. And in the original language, it's very interesting, but it's a very clear declaration of His equality with God. And multiple times throughout His story, they picked up stones to stone Him because He made that declaration. So then we get to verses 28 through 30, and we get God's invitation from the lips of Jesus Himself. And here's what He says. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So we're going to look at 28 first, and then 29 and 30. And Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus gives an invitation for emotional peace. He gives an invitation for emotional peace. The language here is phenomenal. He says, come to me, all who are weary. The word weary means to be beaten down by life. Have you ever felt beaten down by life? Have you ever had to look in the mirror and say, man, life stinks right now? And sometimes life just beats us down. And Jesus says, come to me, everyone who's been beaten down by life. And then he says, all those who are burdened. The word burden it's a worker's term. And it describes someone who has carried a load all day long. And they're just worn out from working so hard. And so Jesus says, come to me, all who've been beaten down by life, who are carrying an incredibly heavy load. And then he says, I will give you rest. All right? And the word rest, it means a refreshing relief. A refreshing relief. And Jesus says, come to me when life tears you down. Come to me when life is miserable. Come to me when you don't know what else to do. And I will give you refreshing relief that you can't get anyplace else. I will give you something that nothing else in the world can give. You see, one of the difficulties we have in life is that we tend to live life hurried. Right? We're all busy. But we don't have to be hurried while we're busy. Have you ever felt so stressed out by life and so overcome by all the things that you have to do that it's like, I can't imagine having to do one more thing. I can't imagine going to the next step. That's what it's like to be hurried. But Jesus says, I'll give you rest. Paul described it as the peace that passes understanding. I will give you something that nothing else can possibly give you. Something that's so wonderful it cannot even be described. I was catching a flight one time. I was doing a connecting flight, and it became pretty clear that the first flight was going to land later than it was supposed to, right? And I don't know if you've ever done this before, but we landed and we pulled up, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be miserable, because I planned it so well that I was going to have time to stop and eat and relax and enjoy everything until the next flight. And all of a sudden, I get off the plane, and I find myself running through Atlanta's airport. I don't know if you've ever run through Atlanta's airport, but oh my goodness, there's a lot of people there, right? So I'm running, and I pass a restroom, and I think, I really need to stop, but I can't. And I'm running, and I smell Cinnabon. And then all of a sudden, I see it, and I think, I really need to stop, but I can't. And I get there and I keep running, and I get there just as the guy is saying, this is the last call for my flight and we're about to close the door. And I take a deep breath, and here it is, and I get on the plane. It was absolutely miserable. Well, not long after that, I flew again, and I was sitting next to a guy that flies all the time. And we were talking, and he looked at his watch, and he said, oh man, I'm going to miss my next flight if they don't hurry. I said, don't you hate running through airports? And he said, I don't run through airports. I said, what do you mean? He said, I just catch the next flight. Catch the next flight. That's an option? Yeah, it's their fault. It's not yours. I'll just catch the next flight. And I'm like, the same exact situation where I'm completely stressed out and completely drained. He's like, it's no big deal. I'll just be a little late. Now, examples of the reality of how people deal with the same exact situations in life. Jesus says, come to me when life beats you down. Come to me when life is miserable. It doesn't mean that the problems are going to go away. It doesn't mean that the difficulties aren't going to be there. But I'm going to allow you to stop and say, hey, it's okay. It's okay. Because there's something much bigger at stake in this world than me. The peace that passes understanding. And so regardless of what life throws at me, I can find internally and emotionally a reality that it's going to be okay. And it's not because I'm such a strong person or not because I have it all together, but because Jesus has given me that promise. And so I want to start with this reality and come to me all who are weary and burdened, that you don't have to live life hurried. It doesn't mean you won't be busy, but Jesus invites us to a life that is not hurried, to a life at peace. And you know, the truth is we have a lot we could make a lot that we are upset about today. And the reality of what's going on with the election has just intensified everything. But Jesus promises us peace if we come to Him, if we trust in Him. That's a beautiful promise. How many of us could use a little peace in our lives today? 2 hands in the balcony, right? How many of us could use peace? Yeah, because life is so stressful and we live so hurried. But Jesus calls us to peace even when we're busy. Well, he goes on, he doesn't stop there, and the invitation is even greater than that. In verses 29 and 30, he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus invites the people of his time to something that they would understand fully. He says, "Put my yoke on you." A yoke would be something that you would take 2 oxen, and it would be a wooden structure that they would put over the shoulders of the oxen and tie them together. And that way the 2 oxen would work together and they would plow together, would make the job much more doable, or they would pull a heavy load. And so the people would hear Jesus talk about the oxen and about the yoke, and it would make perfect sense to them. He said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I'm gentle and humble in heart." And what Jesus was saying, and again, they would have made perfect sense to his audience then. What Jesus was saying is, let me take charge of your life. Let me be the one that chooses where you go. Because you see, the one holding the reins determines the direction of the oxen team. The one holding the reins keeps the oxen team from going off into a ditch. The one holding the reins protects the oxen to make sure that they are not harmed. The one holding the reins makes sure the oxen team focuses on the task at his hand and does not lose sight of what really matters. And Jesus says, listen, let me be in charge. Let me be in charge, and I will give you rest. That rest we talked about emotionally, I will give it to you in your soul. To the very core of who you are as a person, I will give you rest. Now hear me when I say this. There is no place on planet Earth better to be than at the place where your soul is at rest. None. But you see, we have this problem as humans. We think that we know better than God. We think we have it all figured out. We think, well, I can find peace over here in my career. I can find peace in my relationships. I can find peace doing whatever it is. But the truth is, it only comes from one place, from Jesus himself. This past Sunday, we had a very interesting event at our house. Katie was there, and Troy and Cheris were there. And Cheris had gone to the store, and she came back. She opened the door, and these were the words that came out of her mouth. "There's a bird in the house." So I was watching football, and I heard these words, "There's a bird in the house." Now, that's not something you hear every day. I thought, what is she talking about? And all of a sudden, this little bird flies across the room and lands on the curtain rod. Doggone it, there's a bird in the house. Right? And that's not a problem you deal with every day. At least we don't in our place. Maybe you do. We don't deal with birds in the house. All right? So here's what happened. The ladies went to the back porch. I don't know why, but they went to the back porch. It was a little bitty bird. It wasn't, but they went to the back porch. So Troy and I were sitting there, and I said, "Troy, you're the Eagle Scout. Fix this." So I stand up. Troy gets a quilt. And I think the plan is to catch the bird and take it outside and let it go. All right? Now, I think the best plan is for me to just encourage the bird to go out the door. "Listen, little bird, the door's open. Go!" The bird had no intention of doing that. So, all of a sudden, there are 2 men chasing this bird around the house, one with a quilt going like this, and me just encouraging the bird to go. Well, this little bird wasn't catching on. He has a bird brain. He wasn't getting it. He didn't understand the reality that the best possible place for him to be was through the door. The door was open, he was ready, and my sweet wife, she brought a vase in that was full of sticks and flowers and held it up in hopes that the bird would land on it. I said, baby, thank you for your help. But I don't think the bird's going to land there. But please try, by all means. So anyway, we chased the bird down the hall. We chased the bird across the rooms. The bird's going back and forth, and the bird has no intention of listening to us or flying out the door. The bird wants to do its own thing. Now, I don't know how birds function. I don't know how their bird brains work. And so what I'm about to tell you has full potential of being totally untrue. But I think that bird was terrified. And I think that bird's heart was just going, what do I do? I don't understand the anatomy of birds and how all that works, so if you want to correct me later, that's fine. But it looked like it was terrified, or at least it should have been. So the bird keeps flying around. It won't listen to us until finally it lands on the wreath on the front door. And Troy starts to walk towards it, and I say, stop. Walk slowly and shut the door. And he did. And the bird was outside. The bird was safe. The women and children were safe. And life was good. The bird was out. Now, there is a spiritual application to all of this, believe it or not. You and I, sometimes we act like bird brains. Jesus opens the door and he says, this is the way to peace. This is where you need to go. But unlike Troy and I, he doesn't chase us around. He says, here's the door. I'm here for you. If you will go through this door, you will find peace. You will find exactly what you're looking for. You can fly around the house. You can fly over to your career and try to find peace there, but you're going to find out it's empty. You can fly over pursuing material things, but you're going to find out eventually that it's empty. You can pursue relationships and you can try to find peace over there, but eventually you're going to find out that it's empty. And you can list education, you can name whatever you want to on that list. And Jesus is standing at the door saying, here's where the peace is. The door's open. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to drag you outside. I'm not even going to throw a quilt over you and take you out there. You have to decide is what you want to do. And I know if you go through this door, I know that the requirements are tough. I know that means that I get to be in charge. But here's what I'm telling you, just like the oxen, the person controlling the yoke, I promise you I won't drive you into a ditch. I promise that I will take you the right direction, the direction you need to go. I promise that I will lead you exactly where you need to be. I just need you to trust me. Just trust me. I know it's hard to walk through that door. As Jesus said, I told everybody, wide is the road that leads to destruction and narrow is the road that leads to salvation. I know it's a hard choice. I know it's hard to give up control. I know it's hard to say, I will follow you, Jesus, wherever you lead me. I know it's hard to say that, but hear me say that the only way you're going to experience rest in your soul is if you trust me to walk through this door. That's the only place it can be found. People have tried it so many ways, so many other things, and found so much emptiness. But the peace that passes understanding, that goes down to the core of your soul, can only be found in one place. And that's in Jesus himself. So today, we talk about God's invitation. One of the greatest promises that Jesus gave us is that we can have peace. And we can have peace to the very core of our being. Now, please don't hear me say what I'm not saying. It doesn't mean there's not hard times ahead. It doesn't mean there's not valleys ahead. It doesn't mean there's not difficulties ahead. But what it does mean is that even in those times, peace can be real. And Jesus said, just trust me. Just trust me. I've got it all together and all figured out. Just trust me. Would you pray with me?